Hello and welcome back to another reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, this being A Christmas Carol in Prose, being a ghost story of Christmas by Charles Dickens, with 4 illustrations in color and 4 woodcuts by John Leech, a facsimile of the original edition with an introduction by J.K. Chesterton, and a preface by B.W. Matz, London Cecil Palmer, Oakley House, Bloomsbury Street, WC1. And I really don't want to read the next part of the book. So I'm going to give you guys a heads up and a warning that we are at the sad part of the story. If you have not heard A Christmas Carol before, or you haven't been exposed to any of the movies or any such portion of the story, I'm going to give you a heads up to grab a Kleenex box, have it handy, have maybe a cup of tea or hot chocolate or an apple cider, something warm, maybe some mulled wine even if you are an adult, and have it ready at the ready or beverage of choice, and maybe a cozy blanket and a stuffed animal, because this is going to be very hard for me to read. And there will probably be a lot of pauses or a lot of clips in the video. Maybe you might see me jump around quite a bit, just because I will probably have to stop and have myself a little cry and then continue on. So this is the part of the introduction where I let you know to, if you just want to hear the story, jump ahead in the video to what I have written down here, or when I pick this book back up again, or stick around for the facts, fiction, opinions portion of the video. But fair warning, there may be a couple of spoilers in this portion of the video. So if you don't want any spoilers, just feel free to jump ahead. So I mentioned in previous videos of previous staves in the books, if you haven't seen those videos or if you haven't been caught up with us, feel free to go back and watch those so that you can get yourself caught up. Don't worry, when I do start reading again, I will be reading a little bit of the previous videos stave, if you will, or section, if you will, just so that we can catch ourselves back up to where we were. And you may see me in a different outfit because I did film those on the same night. So just if you're curious as to why my outfit has changed when we get to that portion of the video, that's why. I did mention in previous staves and previous videos that Charles Dickens based his characters on people in his life. So 2 of these people that we mentioned before were Fred, Scrooge's nephew, who is based on Charles Dickens' own younger brother, who he was very close to. The other one is Fan, or Fanny, who is based on Charles Dickens' own sister, Fan, and she appears as Scrooge's sister, although I think it's a younger sister for Scrooge in the book, and I believe that it's an older sister for Charles Dickens himself. But both of them are homages and tributes to those actual people, and there is one other one that we know of, which is the one that we will discuss tonight. Now, I did mention that this is going to be difficult for me to read. We are at the sad portion, and that is because Tiny Tim is actually based on Charles Dickens' own nephew. Tiny Tim was, in all accounts, very much real to Charles, and the tribute to him is very prevalent in the book. He is very much a character that everyone sort of feels sorry for and sees as the spirit of charity in A Christmas Carol and the spirit of giving in A Christmas Carol. And basically what is the turning point for Scrooge. He's what you would call maybe a pivot character or a pivotal plot point character that basically changes Scrooge's opinion and changes him around. It's not necessarily Jacob Marley. It is more so Tiny Tim and the fact that Scrooge is so drawn to this young boy. So let's go into why Charles Dickens would actually base Tiny Tim on his own nephew. As opposed to a happy child, Tiny Tim is very ill. This is because at the time of the Victorian period and at the time of the Victorian age, a lot of children were very ill, specifically with rickets, which is a bone deficiency and a lack of vitamin D. Most London skies were known to be very heavily clouded with coal and warehouse and workhouse soot and fog, and basically these clouds would block out the sun and thus produce a vitamin D deficiency in a lot of Londoners, and specifically that of small children. A lot of children also had tuberculosis, which at the time was called consumption. It is said that Tiny Tim is thought to have suffered from either one or the other, or possibly both of these degenerative diseases. Tuberculosis, or consumption as it was known, is a bacterial infection that mostly attacks the lungs, but it can affect other organs in the body. It's caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which is the scientific name for the bacterium, the specific one. And people can have a latent or inactive TB infection, no symptoms, and they can't spread it, but later on they could possibly pass that on to somebody else without even knowing it. So they could be a carrier of this disease and later on possibly carry it to somebody who is immunocompromised. It is thought to have been that half of London's children had either one of these diseases at the time, which is a considerable number if you think about it. Like half of a city's entire population of children were this ill. They were coughing, sneezing, basically dying in the street all the time. And so it is thought that Tiny Tim could have survived his illnesses, either one or both, if he had had these, just with more supplementation of a better diet, sunshine, exercise, that kind of thing. More of a supplement of like cod liver oil and vitamin D, these sort of remedies, if you will. But because the Cratchit family is living in poverty and they are impoverished and they have about 5 or 6 children, it's thought that they don't have the means to take care of Tiny Tim, unfortunately. So why would Charles Dickens create such a character and such an ill-ridden child after his own nephew? Fan's young son, Henry Burnett Jr., is who Tiny Tim is based on. He was disabled and he suffered from poor health, and he didn't make it past the age of 9. He died of tuberculosis when he was quite young. Much of the character, and much like the character Tiny Tim, most of these parallels can be drawn to Tiny Tim, the impoverished and sick children of the Victorian age, as well as Charles Dickens' own nephew Henry. So Tiny Tim's original name was actually going to be Tiny Mick or Fred. And as you know, he gave the name Fred to Scrooge's nephew, and Fred became a embodiment of Charles Dickens' younger brother instead. And the tribute became that this person was full of life. They were full of love. They were full of laughter all the time, which really gives you a sense of like how loved and how much full of life and how much full of positivity Fred probably portrayed towards everybody else in the world around him, and how much of a lovable person he was. It's not really specified why Dickens called Tiny Tim what he did, but it is known that he settled upon the name later after Henry's death. Perhaps I like to think This is my own personal opinion, but I like to think that with his charities that he would wander through and visit. Perhaps it was that one that he visited in October at a orphanage where he met a young boy named Tim who reminded him of his nephew and decided to conglomerate the two and create the character Tiny Tim. Who knows? I don't. That is my own personal fantasy and opinion of maybe what could have happened. Or perhaps he just liked the name Tim or Timothy. But ultimately, it is a very iconic character, and I think the Cratchit family itself in the book, even though they're actually not that big of characters in the book, they get blown up into modern society, into bigger characters, and more people seem to relate to them because they are a working class family. So I think society has kind of brought them into a larger role than they actually play in the book. So while it's not specifically stated that Tiny Tim had rickets or tuberculosis, is speculated. This is because of medical detectives that have done work on the character and what was prevalent at the time of the Victorian period. The other two possible things that Tiny Tim may have had are, or a combination of these things, were polio, which was also very prevalent at the time, and cerebral palsy. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I have a very hard time pronouncing that word. Dyslexia gets the better of me. There's also a very strong case of Tiny Tim having Pott's disease, but being that his own nephew died of tuberculosis, I would say that it's probably TB instead of anything else, or likely rickets, just because of the correlation between rickets and the Victorian age children. It is long said that Charles Dickens has an affinity for creating sickly children. I mean, if you look at Little Dorrit or David Copperfield or Oliver Twist, these children, or at least even some of the background children, are very ill and they're very sickly. And this was just due to what was relatable at the time of the writing itself. So you could say that these books are a product of their time, that the conditions are that of the working poor. Without further ado, let's pick up this book and read on Stave 4, Part 3, The Cratchit's House. Yes. Soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. The children's faces hushed and clustered round to hear what they so little understood were brighter. And it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him caused by the event was one of pleasure. Let me see some tenderness connected with the death, said Scrooge. Or that dark chamber spirit, which we left just now, will be forever present to me. The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, that dwelling that he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. And he took a child and set him in the midst of them. Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. "The colour hurts my eyes," she said. The colour? Oh, poor Tiny Tim. "They are better now again," said Cratchit's wife. "It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time." "Past it, rather," Peter answered, shutting up his book. "But I think he has walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings, Mother." They were very quiet again. At last she said, and in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once, I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed." "So have I," cried Peter. "Often." "So have I," exclaimed another. So had all. "But he was very light to carry," she resumed, intent upon her work. "And his father loved him so that it was no trouble. And there is your father at the door." She had hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got up on his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father. Don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with him and spoke pleasantly to all the family, and looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. "Sunday? You went today, then, Robert?" said his wife. "Yes, my dear," returned Bob. "I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green the place is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on Sunday." "My little child," cried Bob. "My little child." He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart, perhaps, than they were. He left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened and went down again quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked, the girls and the mother working still. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day, and seeing that he looked just a little down, you know, said Bob, inquired what happened to distress him. "On which," said Bob, "for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you have ever heard, I told him, 'I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit,' he said, 'and heartily sorry for your good wife.' By the by, however he knew that, I don't know." "Knew what, my dear?" "Why, that you were a good wife," replied Bob. "Everybody knows that," said Peter. "Well observed, my boy," cried Bob. "I hope they do. Heartily sorry," he said, "for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way," he said, giving me his card, "that's where I live. Pray come to me." "Now, it wasn't," cried Bob. for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way, that this was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim and felt with us. I'm sure he's a good soul, said Mrs. Cratchit. You'd be sure of it, my dear, returned Bob, if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be surprised at all, mark what I say, if he got Peter a better situation. Only hear that, Peter, said Mrs. Cratchit.
And then,
cried one of the girls,
Peter will be keeping company with someone and setting up for himself. Get along with you,
retorted Peter, grinning. It's just as likely as not, said Bob. One of these days, though, there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part from one another, I'm sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim. Shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us?
Never, father,
cried they all. And I know, said Bob, I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves, and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it.
No, never, father,
they all cried again. I am very happy, said little Bob. I am very happy. Mrs. Cratchit kissed him. His daughters kissed him. The two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was from God. Spectre, said Scrooge. Something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was whom we saw lying dead. And that is where we stop for tonight. Join us again tomorrow for another reading of A Christmas Carol. I'm going to go sob in a corner now. Good night.